The quickest downfalls in UFC history. Over the years, the UFC has witnessed the rise of relatively unheard-of fighters who went on to become worldwide superstars. But just as quickly as some competitors make their way to the top of the rankings, they can soon find themselves at rock bottom. Join us in this video as we discuss 5 of the quickest downfalls in UFC history. Number 5. Cody Garbrandt. Back at UFC 182, we saw the debut of Cody Garbrandt. He became an instant favorite among fans, going on a 5-fight win streak with 4 knockout finishes. This led Garbrandt to a shot at the bantamweight title just 2 years after joining the promotion. The rising star was on every fan's radar, with some suggesting he could be the next long-reigning champ. But standing in his way was the king of the division, Dominick Cruz. When the pair finally met at UFC 207 in 2016, we can safely say no one expected Garbrandt to dominate the way he did. He put on a spectacular performance, winning by unanimous decision and became one of the division's youngest ever champions in the process. Pegged a highlight reel finisher, big things were expected of Garbrandt's reign, but just as quick as he rose to the top, he would soon find himself at the bottom of the pecking order. The newly crowned bantamweight champ would make his first title defense against former teammate TJ Dillashaw at UFC 217. While Garbrandt started the fight strong, knocking TJ down in the first round, his weakness of being unable to leave the pocket forced him to eat a heavy right in the second. And just like that, Garbrandt had lost his title before his reign truly began. Ultimately, this started a chain reaction for the former champion, one from which he would not recover. Garbrandt would meet TJ again the following summer, but this time he was finished in the first round. After a double loss to Dillashaw, it seems the former champion just couldn't recover, going 2 for 3 in his next 5. All of the hype Garbrandt built during the run to his first bantamweight title shot seemingly disappeared the night TJ finished him. This led to fans witnessing one of the quickest downfalls in UFC history. Number 4. Chris Weidman. MMA fans will forever remember UFC 162 in the summer of 2013, for it was when we first saw Anderson Silva look like a mortal human. The middleweight champion met Chris Weidman in the octagon, and to the surprise of fans around the world, the American finished Silva by way of a knockout in the second round. This ended a 17-fight winning streak for the Spider. Weidman was now considered the new king of the middleweight division, and rightfully so. He would go on to defend his title against Silva in a rematch before beating both Lyoto Machida and Vitor Belfort. With a record of 13-0, fans were beginning to think Weidman was invincible. The All-American had a tremendous striking game, wrestling that set him apart from the division, and he could even finish his opponents via submission. But this all changed when the champion met Luke Rockhold at UFC 194. When the pair met inside the octagon, everything was running smoothly for the champion until he missed an ill-advised wheel kick. The scramble that followed left Weidman trapped on the ground, and Rockhold was able to finish him after inflicting a harsh beating. The defeat Weidman suffered on this fateful evening changed the course of his career. Weidman would go on to suffer back-to-back losses to Yoel Romero and Gegard Mousasi. Just as quick as Weidman had made it to the top, he was catapulted down the ranks. Following the loss to Mousasi, the former champ went 2 for 2 before suffering one of the most horrendous leg breaks in the history of the UFC to Uriah Hall in 2021, effectively ruling him out of competing for over 2 years. Number 3. Robbie Lawler. No fighter has taken such a long and winding path to find success as Robbie Lawler. We saw him make his UFC debut way back in 2002, and he quickly made a name for himself going on a 3-fight win streak. But after a few lackluster fights, Lawler was released by the promotion in 2004. Following this, he became a bit of a nomad, fighting on an array of promotions such as Pride, Elite XC, and Strikeforce, before finally earning a much-anticipated return to the UFC in 2013. Many had already written off Lawler by the time he returned to the promotion, citing that he'd just spent too much time away from competing against the best in the world. But to the surprise of fans, Lawler went on a 3-fight win streak and earned himself a shot at Johnny Hendricks' welterweight title. While he was ultimately defeated by way of a decision when the pair met at UFC 171, this seems to have lit a fire in his heart. Lawler went back to the drawing board, and with a few adjustments, he bounced back with wins over Jake Ellenberger and Matt Brown to earn another shot at Hendrick's title, and this time he would be victorious. After becoming the new welterweight champion, Lawler would superbly defend his title against Rory McDonald and Carlos Condit. This gave him an impressive run of 8 wins and 1 loss since his UFC return. But, as we've witnessed many times before, things can change in the blink of an eye, and they did for the welterweight champion. When Lawler met Tyrone Woodley at UFC 201, he was finished in the first round, and this triggered his great downfall. While he bounced back with a win over Donald Cerrone, the former champion went on to lose 5 of his next 6 fights and was no longer considered a real contender in the division. Number 2. Ronda Rousey. At one point, Dana White considered Ronda Rousey the greatest superstar the UFC had ever produced. She was a dominant fighter, brought in an enormous pull on pay-per-views, and was loved by fans around the world. Rousey claimed her first title on Strikeforce following a dominant performance against her future rival, Miesha Tate, back in 2012. When the UFC incorporated many of the Strikeforce fighters into the promotion in the following years, Rousey would soon prove to the UFC fans why she was considered the world's most dangerous female fighter. The bantamweight champion would defend her title on 6 occasions from 2013 to 2015, earning each victory by way of submission or knockout. Rousey seemed an invincible force in the division. That was until she met Holly Holm at UFC 193. Just 2 rounds into the highly anticipated matchup, fans would soon be left in shock. Rousey didn't look like her usual confident self in the fight at all and was finished by way of knockout a minute into round 2. Unfortunately, just as quickly as she'd become the biggest name in the sport, she'd now become just another contender. After this, Rousey was never the same. While we wouldn't see her return for another year, when Rousey finally fought Nunes at UFC 207, within 48 seconds she was finished, and this completed her great downfall. Number 1. Tony Ferguson. Our last downfall is the one that's pained us the most to watch. This is the downfall of the former UFC lightweight interim champ Tony Ferguson. Back in 2020, El Cucuy was one of the most feared contenders in the lightweight division. He was on a winning streak of 12 fights, having defeated killers such as Kevin Lee, Anthony Pettis, and Donald Cerrone. Following a string of impressive wins, fans were eager to finally see the long-anticipated bout between Ferguson and Khabib. But when the COVID pandemic struck, it disrupted these plans. Instead of facing the Dagestani, Ferguson was matched up with Justin Gaethje in the main event of UFC 249. When the pair met inside the octagon, El Cucuy took one of the worst beatings of his career, and the fight was eventually stopped in the 5th round. Since the fight against Gaethje, Ferguson has gone on to suffer a string of losses to competitors such as Charles Oliveira, Michael Chandler, and Nate Diaz, taking an incredible amount of damage along the way. Fans are continuously wondering if the former title challenger has the heart to continue much longer. Essentially, Ferguson has fallen from grace faster than any other fighter in the history of the UFC. We hope you enjoyed our video on the 5 quickest downfalls in the history of the UFC. If you'd like to see more videos like this on all things MMA, consider subscribing to our YouTube channel, Mad About MMA. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next time.